Hi everyone, Sandra Duran Wilson here, and welcome to Mixed Media Soul Sparks. Every week I bring you mixed media techniques, inspirational exercises, and studio tips. This week we're going to be exploring Tyvek, and you might wonder, what is Tyvek? You might have seen it wrapped around houses, and it's T-Y-V-E-K. It's that stuff they wrap houses in. But it's also what they use for mailing envelopes. So I don't advocate going to the post office and getting it, but just in case you happen to have a mailing envelope, this is what it does. Now, Tyvek is made to withstand everything but heat. And so that's what we're going to use to create these really cool textures. So we're going to use heat and paint. Sometimes I like to paint it first, other times I like to heat it and then paint it. So I'm going to share with you one way of heating it is with an iron. And the one important part you want to use is parchment paper. And this is cooking parchment paper because you want to put your Tyvek in between the parchment paper. Now I got a big piece of it and I'm going to cut it up into smaller pieces. I have discovered that if I try and heat it as a large piece, it doesn't work as well. And it's going to shrink up. And I was just sharing that there's a couple of different kinds of Tyvek. The kind that's made for mailing envelopes or wrapping houses in is a bit stiffer. There's also a kind that is softer. You can see it's almost like a fabric, and that's what they use it for, is making, you might have seen like overalls or coveralls that house painters wear, and it's made out of this stuff. I prefer the thicker stuff, but I'm going to show you how to work with both of them. Now I've got my iron turned on and it's set to about permanent press, but no water. You don't want steam. And I'm going to use a towel to kind of create a, oops, I just dropped all my stuff. Just put this towel underneath my table, and I have to put it in between the parchment, but you might be able to see it as it starts to happen. So it's pretty hot. The iron is pretty hot. And here's the trick, is you don't want to really press down. You want the heat on there, but you want enough space that the Tyvek can actually shrink up. So I'm kind of just holding it to where it's floating over the surface. And I might just up the temperature a bit. This is my studio iron. I don't do much ironing otherwise. I just use it in the studio. And it's going to be one of those things where it just kind of has that magic moment where there it goes. It starts to happen. And when it starts to happen, it just shrinks up really quick. Up this heat a little. There we go. Because if I move the iron to where it's just barely touching, I need to increase the heat. I've got it up to cotton now. There we go. And I'm going to move this so you can see what's going on. You see how it's starting to do these really cool bubbles. And there's no explanation why some are big and some are small. I've tried over all the years I've been doing this to figure out why, but it's just a thing of the universe. Why does Tyvek bubble the way it bubbles? There we go. You can even burn it like I just did there, so. So you got some really interesting shapes doing it with the iron. Now these are really big bubbles, but sometimes that can be interesting. Now I'll show you painting this one, and I'm going to paint another one before I heat it, and I'm going to show you heating it with a heat gun instead of with the iron. So let me turn my iron off. And cut this piece. I'm just going to put a little color on here. And these Lumiere paints are really nice to have a kind of fluorescent, not fluorescent, but an iridescent color. And the benefit is that as I'm drying this with the heat gun, I'll be also heating it, making the bubbles. Okay. So right now, I just want to kind of dry this paint, but your bubbles on the Tyvek are going to move away from the heat source. So if I continue to heat this from this direction, the bubbles are going to go in. Whereas if I turn it over and heat it this way, then the bubbles are going to be coming out like this. So I'm just going to heat this slightly just to get the paint dry, and then I'm going to flip it over. It starts to go. Kind of have to keep moving it. I'm going to use my scissors to kind of hold it. You get a lot bigger bubbles doing it this way than ironing it. I'm going to heat it a little more. It's still warm, so I'm kind of pressing it down, because if it's so bubbled up, it makes it difficult to adhere to a surface. And another little tip you could do, if you don't flatten it out when it's still warm like that, you can also put it underneath the iron for just a moment to just flatten it a bit. If you just reheat it, you can do this. So you see how where it crinkles up, it makes the paint darker. Even though it was all painted the same, it's where the material starts to condense. And even here, I just kept heating it until it melted, which you could do here. Now, when you paint it afterward, you have a bit more control over it. I'm going to reheat this a little so that I can flatten it a bit. And sometimes you might even choose to use it this way. I think they look great either way. So let me just get a little paint on here. I'll use the same paint. We can compare. Missed a little water. And the beautiful part of this is you can just layer more colors and create these kind of effects with different colors after you've heated it. So by spraying it with the water is going to move the paint into the creases, giving it a very similar effect. So whichever way you want to heat it, it's up to you, and do some experiments. This one, I painted it on the back side. Then I heated it from here, and you can see the bubbles stayed kind of white, and then I got this color in the background. So that's another way to do it. You're going to find yourself getting hooked on this stuff. It's a lot of fun. I use a gel medium to adhere it to my surfaces. But I want to show you one other trick here. And I'm going to use this soft Tyvek in an embroidery hoop. And it's kind of the opposite. It's like I was saying, you needed to leave enough room for the Tyvek to shrink up. And on this one, we're doing the opposite. So I'm going to use the heat gun. See, it's starting to get holes in it already here. And I'm directing the heat gun certain areas. So you get this Swiss cheese effect. And here's one that I did earlier. And I can take this and cut out shapes of it. I could paint it. Or leave it white. And it can become a very interesting collage element. You know, if I put it over here and added it to a piece. And of course, it takes the paint beautifully, just like the other Tyvek that was bubbled. This has a bit of a weave. This was the fabric one, so it is slightly different that way. And one thing to note is if you paint your Tyvek before you heat it, this piece had a heavy coating of paint on it, and it never would bubble. So don't put a heavy coat of paint on. Put a light coat of paint on if you want the bubble effect, or you can even just paint it afterwards. So experiment, whether you're painting it on the back side, the front side, doing layers. And here's one other idea for you. So you get these beautiful, interesting effects of Tyvek. What else can you do with this? So we've gone over transfers before. So what I did with, not this particular piece, this one before I painted it, is I took it and I made a copy of it on my laser printer. Now I put it face down on the laser printer, and then I had to put a piece of black paper behind it in order to get the imagery. But I can cut this out and use it as a transfer. And the only place I'm going to see the effect is where these kind of bubbles are, these lines. So it's going to give it a very kind of faint effect, but also another interesting way to do it. So when you go to adhere this onto your surface, take your gel, maybe a medium gel, matte or gloss, doesn't matter. Kind of use your knife and layer it in there and then press it down. I don't like to weight it because then it'll flatten it out, and I prefer to have, the bubbles like this. This is slightly more flattened than that one, but it's a matter of taste, how you want it to look. So you're going to find that there's so many different ways to use Tyvek, and I love to use it in collage elements and cut it up into different shapes. Even after I've created this, like this size, I can cut it up and have these little openings showing through. So go find your iron, dig it out from wherever you buried it in the laundry room, and get yourself some Tyvek, parchment paper. Make sure you use parchment paper or a heat gun. This isn't a hair dryer, it's a heat gun. So those are all very important tips. And let's see what you make. Let's post some images in the Facebook group, or make comments in the video, and like and share, and let me know what else you would like us to share with you on mixed media techniques, studio tips, inspiration exercises, and thank you for joining me. Join the community and share your creations on social. Use the hashtag MixedMediaSoulSparks. I look forward to seeing your comments in the comment section.